Welcome to our next tutorial. In this lesson, we are going to be going through and making an ad in Photoshop for a Photoshop class through Adobe. So I'm going to start with this image here from Bali, one of the temples, and this is what I'm going to be making, going through adjustment layers. So I'm going to start first with a new doc, and I know I'm going to be making something for web-based things. I have a custom here, but I can also go up to web and just find size. So we're going to start with a large, and I'm going to change this so it's a square format for Instagram and make it 1080 by 1080, which gives me this blank artboard. Now I'm going to go back into my image, and there's a couple of things to check in here first. I know my final format is square, so I can just drop this in here, but I know that it was also much larger to begin with. So I can move it around and kind of see what I want, but if I need to shrink it down, I'm going to zoom out and do just a quick Command T to transform and just adjust the scale down here to whatever I want. So I'm going to move it around. You can see the controls on the outside edge. Now I do see there's a slight tilt in the horizon, so I'm going to adjust that until I'm happy with that. And then in the end, I'm going to hit Enter or Return to finish my transform. All right, so let's zoom in and see what we have here. You, of course, can do a Command 0 to get full size. I'm going to go a little bit smaller so that I can make some adjustments. Now I'm going to start first with my adjustment layers. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee to pull out a section. I'm going to make this about 1.5. I'm not going to be exact on it, but kind of pretty close. And I'm going to start with my first adjustment, which is color balance. And I'm just going to make some changes and shifts so that you can see the adjustment layer happen. Now, if you look down in the layers panel, you're going to see that color balance adjustment layer pop out in front of my background layer of my photograph. So I'm going to collapse that, do another rectangular marquee for a section, and I'm going to jump over and do a second adjustment layer. Now, one thing I like about adjustment layers versus image adjustments is that you can really see where these sections are. It creates a mask already. I can make a change, such as a photo filter. I can see the difference between these, and of course, I can turn on or turn off my adjustment layers if I decide I don't like them. So let's do one more. Again, roughly about at 1.5, but it doesn't matter so much. And this last one, I'm going to start with just some hue change, just to get something very different from the first three, just so you can see what that would look like across a picture. Let's saturate that just a little bit so it shows up. And then this last section, I'm going to take this entire last section and turn this into black and white. Now, I love the adjustment layers in black and white because you can go into each of the channels and you can make some adjustments. So I have a lot of cyan in this picture, and as I shift it, it's going to adjust the value in my black and white to get the contrast that I need. It's one of the things I show my students first, that you should change the channels in your black and white adjustment layer to get the best effects out of your picture. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I can see all the edges. There's a little bit of overlap, so I'm going to click on the Move tool and go into this layer. So I get into this layer and just tap it over. I can turn that on and off. And one of my favorite things is the gradient mask. So I'm going to go in here and just kind of drop that in so you can kind of see what it looks like. It's a really fun adjustment. But I'm going to decide I don't want it to cover the entire piece right here. So I'm going to go into the gradient tool and I'm going to slide it across the mask. Oh, wrong way. Let's go the other way. And it's going to still apply that adjustment, but only as a gradient across. So again, I can turn these on and off and see if it's something that I like. So if I turn off the black and white, you can see just that cool little color effect as a gradation across. I can go back into this at any time, and I can go ahead and change this if I want. So instead of this orange, what if I choose just a different color? Let's go with green. It's kind of bold and bright. Let me see if I try a cyan, see what that looks like, or a bright blue. Something in here. Let's just give this a try and see what effect that is. Okay, so I've just changed my gradient. And now I still have a gradient map over my picture. I can turn this on, turn this off if I decide I want to keep it, or if I decide I don't want to keep it. So here's my inspiration image that I created earlier. So now we're going to add in the text. In this one, I did a blue and green gradient map. I have something different just because I'm trying another one. So I'm going to start with my type tool. I'm going to draw out a text box so it fits within the space and go ahead and put my text inside. Okay, let's move this around and see what works. Let's draw another text box over here to give more information about the class. We start with non-destructive adjustment layers in Photoshop CC, and let's give a little bit more of a description about what's going to happen. So this is really about harnessing the power of what adjustment layers do. They are non-destructive because you can turn them on or turn them off. And there's some really great things you can do, like adding a gradient within the mask to let these adjustment layers fade in and out or overlap each other. Of course, we could also change the modes on these, but this class is going to take you into just what adjustment layers can do for you and do for any image to make it more creative. Okay, so let's move this down so it's going to give a little bit more breathing room. And let's add in, I'll just shift it a little bit. Okay, so when I do this and I go on the controls, it's going to adjust the text itself. So I'm going to go to the layer instead. And on the layer here, I'm going to just end that transformation. Okay, so I'm going to go to the layer instead. And when I activate the type in this layer and I adjust the text box, it's going to adjust my text within that space as well. Great. So now let's do our last text box down here and add in just location and date. So we're going to pretend that this is happening on the 15th. And I'm actually going to pretend it's an in-class workshop as opposed to an online workshop. So we're going to give it a location and a room and also a time. And again, let's move this around, see what kind of spacing looks the best in here. I always like to pull things a little bit away from the edges, just in case the platform that you're working on clips your images. It should have live sensitivity where it's going to adjust, but just in case, I like to move things. And also, text should never be right up against the edge. So I'm going to use these little guides, the smart guides that show up, and just make sure things are aligned from top to bottom. And I'm pretty much done here. I've decided I don't really like this blue in there. It seems a little stronger, but I'm losing some of my text without that color layer. So I might just go back in and make some adjustments to either my text or my gradient layer. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add in a little bit of a drop shadow to my effects button on the bottom, just so it pulls that white away from the background. So I can decide how dark I want that drop shadow to be, how far away from the text itself, or just how fuzzy, what the spread and what the size of this drop shadow is. So I'm going to keep it pretty small. I just want a little bit of darkness behind my white text to kind of push it away and pop it out from the background layer. I'm going to try this text and say what would be better. If the white isn't showing up, let's try black on there. And I still kind of feel like that's difficult to see. So what happens if I turn on this gradient layer one more time? I think I'm going to need to keep this gradient layer, and I'm going to change my text back into white. On the wrong one. There we go. Let's change our text back to white. just so we have that contrast. And I'm not really feeling this blue, so I'm going to go back in and just go back to my default of a little bit of that orange for warmth and hit OK. And that's the great thing about adjustment layers. At any point, I can really go back and finesse that and make some changes. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Gives you a little idea of the power of adjustment layers. So keep playing with them and enhance your images and expand your creativity. Thanks.